Today's presentation is by our beloved Phil Rylett. He is our beloved. He is the main moderator. I'm now the second, the fill-in. He's done a beautiful job coming during all this time with COVID when I had backed off. So, why are vaccines so controversial? Are vaccines a victim of their success, or is there something that warrants the controversy today? Phil will look at the history of vaccines and their rocky history to the present. Since their advent, there has been opposition, but there was one case in recent history that spawned an entire movement of distrust. What was the story behind this particular case? Phil will follow the science and the money. Phil Rylett has a degree in pharmacology and worked as a pharmacologist for several years until leaving and becoming a nurse. Later, in third career change, saw him move to computer programming and database management. He finished his working life running a system for the early detection of breast and cervical cancer in uninsured women in the state of California. Don't you find it surprising, like, that he's really kind of so bright? He just doesn't have a class usually. So, but anyway, what can we do? Let's welcome our dear friend.
Okay. You notice when Cat took the stage, the sun came out? I don't know whether you noticed that. Yeah. Yeah, very, okay. Okay. I'm going to give you an account by someone. I'm going to put my glasses on too. I'm going to take my mic off. Sorry about being in the splash zone. The following is an account by someone who lived in the US during the pre-vaccine era. When parents were fearful of pandemics, at school, in 1st through 8th grade, I had classmates who suffered from scarlet fever, mumps, measles, German measles, chickenpox, and whooping cough. I had rubella and had to stay in bed for several days in a darkened room. They thought light was bad for sick children's eyes. Several of the diseases required that the family put a quarantine sign on the door, and the children missed a lot of school. As an adult, I knew survivors, men who could not father children because they had mumps, a woman with a flail arm from polio, people with chickenpox scars, those deafened because of measles, a man who spent 3 years in a tuberculosis sanitarium, and a woman whose child was mentally disabled because she had German measles during her pregnancy. Now, they experienced their illnesses before vaccines. So, it is not surprising that vaccines have been cheered upon their arrival. Well, not always. Not everyone has been happy. Opposition to vaccine has existed as long as vaccines itself. There was fierce opposition to smallpox vaccine in England and in the United States until the mid-1800s. Widespread smallpox vaccination began in the early 1800s following Edward Jenner's cowpox experiments. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that. He showed he could protect a child from smallpox if he infected him or her with liquid extracted from the sores on the udders of cows infected with cowpox or from the lesions of the hands of infected milkmaids. Jenner's ideas were novel at the time, but they were met with immediate public criticism. The rationale for the criticism varies. Some people thought they objected for sanitary reasons, or religious, or scientific, or political reasons. For some parents, the smallpox vaccine itself induced fear and protest. It included scoring the flesh of a young child and inserting fluid from an infected cowpox blister. Some objectors, including the local clergy, believed that the vaccine was unchristian because it originally came from an animal. By the way, the word vac in vaccine comes from vaca, so it's from the cow. For other anti-vaccinators, their discontent with the smallpox vaccine reflected their general distrust in medicine and Jenner's ideas about disease spread. At the time, they still thought that disease was spread by miasma or bad air. It was pre-germ theory, or it was around the time when germ theory was starting. Many objected to the vaccination because it violated their personal liberty, attention condition that worsened as the government developed mandatory vaccine policies. Laws ordering the compulsory vaccination were met with immediate resistance from citizens who demanded the right to control their bodies and those of their children. The Anti-Vaccine League and the Anti-Compulsory Vaccine League formed in response to mandatory laws, and numerous anti-vaccination journals sprung up. The town of Leicester, England, was a particular hotbed of anti-vaccine activity and the site of many anti-vaccine rallies. One local paper described the details of a rally. An escort was formed, preceded by a banner to escort a young mother and two men, all of whom had resolved to give themselves up to the police and undergo imprisonment in preference to having their children vaccinated. The three were attended by a numerous crowd. 3 hearty cheers were given for them, which were renewed with increased vigour as they entered the doors of the police cells. The Leicester demonstration of 1885 was one of the most notorious anti-vaccine demonstrations. There were 80 to 100,000 anti-vaccinators, and they led an elaborate march, complete with banners and a child's coffin. Such demonstrations and general vaccine opposition led to the development of a commission designed to study the vaccination in the UK. And in 1896, the commission found that the vaccination protected against smallpox, but suggested removing penalties for failure to vaccinate. The Vaccination Act of 1898 removed penalties and included a conscientious objector clause, so that parents who did not believe in the vaccination's safety or efficacy could obtain an exemption certificate. Toward the end of the 19th century, smallpox outbreaks in the United States led to vaccine campaigns and related anti-vaccine activity. The Anti-Vaccination Society of America was founded in 1879, following a visit to America by leaders of the British anti-vaccination movement. In 1902, following a smallpox outbreak, the Board of Health of the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, mandated all city residents to be vaccinated against smallpox. City resident Henning Jacobson refused vaccination on the grounds that the law violated his right to care for his own body, how he knew best. In turn, the city filed criminal charges. After losing his court battle locally, Jacobson appealed to the US Supreme Court. In 1905, the court found in the state's favor, ruling that the state could enact compulsory laws to protect the public in the event of communicable diseases. This was the first US Supreme Court case concerning the power of states in public health law. Now, anti-vaccination positions and vaccination controversies are not limited to the past. In 1970, an international controversy over the safety of the DTP vaccine erupted in Europe, Asia, Australia, and North America. In the United Kingdom, opposition resulted in response to a report from the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children, who alleged that 36 children had suffered neurological conditions following being vaccinated with the DTP vaccine. DTP is diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Television documentaries and newspapers drew public attention to the controversy in response to decreased vaccination rates and 3 major epidemics of whooping cough, and that's the pertussis. And after that happened, the Joint Commission on Vaccination and Immunisation, an independent expert advisory committee in the UK, confirmed the safety of the vaccination. Nevertheless, public confusion continued, in part because of the amplification of opposing opinions of a small group of medical professionals. The US controversy began with media attention on the risks of DTP. A 1982 documentary, DPT, Vaccination Rylett, described alleged adverse reactions to the immunization and minimized the benefits. Similarly, a 1991 book titled A Shot in the Dark outlined potential risks. The resultant media storm instigated several lawsuits against vaccine manufacturers, increased vaccine prices, and caused some companies to stop making the DTP vaccine altogether. And nearly 25 years after the DTP controversy, England was again the site of anti-vaccination activity, this time regarding the MMR vaccine. Probably the most notorious driver behind anti-vaccine sentiment was the link between autism and MMR. MMR was the triple vaccine that offered protection against mumps, measles and rubella, otherwise known as German measles. I'd like to delve a little deeper into this controversy because I think it highlights what can lie underneath the surface of scientific news. Now, the vaccine is normally given at 12 to 15 months in a baby's life. Many childhood diseases manifest themselves at this age when infant development becomes more complex and deviation from the norm signals potential disease. Autism can be diagnosed, but not reliably, between 12 and 18 months. Now, with so many children being vaccinated, it's quite expected that the onset of childhood diseases would coincide with the vaccinations given. Parents will link any disease first manifested at this age to any medical event, like a vaccination. In England in 1992, a 1-year-old boy by the name of Robert Fletcher became seriously ill with convulsions. Robert was diagnosed as being epileptic and was quite ill with several fits a week. His mother, Jackie, was convinced that the problems were caused by the MMR vaccine that Robert had been given 10 days prior. Jackie Fletcher put an ad in the newspaper to see whether she could find out if there were any other parents whose children had experienced the same thing and become ill after their MMR shot. Many parents came forward, and a support group called JABS was born. JABS stood for Justice, Action and Basic Support, and JABS is the colloquial term for a shot in England, a jab. There were a hotbed of myths regarding vaccinations, including turning off all wireless devices, especially wireless baby monitors, as it interacted with the MMR vaccine to create more problems. Sound familiar? Right, G? A lawyer by the name of Richard Barr saw the ad and thought this might be a good class action suit in the making. He contacted the group and began acting on their behalf. And he started looking for ways that they could receive compensation and the way that he could receive compensation. So he went through the UK's legal aid system. The legal aid system was designed to make money available to low-income families to pay for the lawyer. The only problem was that Barr didn't really have any evidence that the MMR vaccine actually caused the problems. Now, to get around the problem, Barr came up with a pioneering approach. He applied to the legal aid system to get government funding to do some clinical studies into associations between the vaccine and problems such as autism. For this, he needed a sympathetic doctor to assist him in his scheme. Enter Richard Wakefield. Dr. Wakefield was an English doctor specialising in bowel problems at the Royal Free Hospital in London. In early 1996, Wakefield had already been approached by a mother, Rosemary Kessick, who a mother of a child with severe bowel problems, and the child was also autistic. Miss Kessick ran a group called Allergy-Induced Autism and wrote books about gluten and lactose-free diet for children with autism. And she sought Dr. Wakefield for his expertise on bowel issues. She described how little William had deteriorated at the age of 15 months from a healthy developing toddler into a withdrawn, incommunicative child who screamed through the night, and how his bowels seemed to be on fire with constant diarrhea and pain. And all of this had started, she said, within days after William received a MMR shot. In the end, Wakefield, a specialist in intestinal diseases, did more than just listen. He came up with a hypothesis that William and other victims were suffering from a unique form of intestinal disease related to their autism that might have been provoked by the MMR vaccine. He also claimed that the vaccine might be one reason for the soaring rates of autism in the the developed world over the past several years. This caught the attention of lawyer Richard Barr. Barr contacted Wakefield for his expertise, and the two men met in 1996. He persuaded Dr. Wakefield to sign a contract with him to investigate the claim from the jab's parents using the money from the UK's legal aid fund. Wakefield signed the contract in 1996, which was for Wakefield to conduct clinical studies and scientific research into the MMR vaccine with the goal of finding evidence of a new syndrome. This new syndrome would be the centerpiece of lawsuits brought by Barr on behalf of the families of children who had contracted it. These families will be recruited through media, press, TV, etc. Wakefield and Barr started to give press interviews. The following are signs to look for. Barr would then give a list of common intestinal symptoms and mental issues. If your child has suffered from all or any of these symptoms, could you please contact us, and it may be appropriate to put you in touch with Dr. Wakefield. In the end, 1,600 families signed up. Barr paid Wakefield with money from the legal aid fund, which amounted to almost $1 million. Wakefield designed a study with 12 children with various mental problems who had all been given the MMR vaccine. This was now 1997. Now, no one knew in the hospital where he worked that he had a secondary source of money from his legal aid scheme, and which clearly represented a conflict of interest, and Wakefield never declared it. Wakefield got to work devising a study that would show the existence of this new syndrome. He claimed that children were suffering from Crohn's disease, a nasty type of inflammatory bowel disease. He said it was caused by the measles virus in bowel tissue invoked by the MMR vaccine. He filed a patent for a diagnostic test and a business prospectus that predicted a turnover of over $100 million. Now, to sum up, Wakefield signed a contract to do a study to find a new syndrome that implicated the MMR vaccine. The syndrome was needed for the lawyer, Barr, to sue the vaccine manufacturers on behalf of families that Barr and Wakefield had recruited via TV, radio, and press. Barr collected the money from legal aid, the government program, to pay for the study. Wakefield and Barr then filed a patent for a test that could measure the presence of this new, as yet undiscovered syndrome. And sorry, but it gets murkier. Although Wakefield was to become the darling of the anti-vaccination crowd, his position was that vaccines were not harmful. He claimed it was only the combination of giving vaccine for mumps, measles, and rubella together that was the problem. In 1998, Wakefield filed another patent, this time for a standalone measles vaccine. The doctor whose work provoked a worldwide scare over the MMR vaccine failed to mention that about his own commercial rival to the MMR vaccine. But his measles virus vaccine was never developed as a standalone measles vaccine. The MMR vaccine was dominant in the market, public confidence in its safety was high, and for Wakefield to enjoy success with the standalone measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine had to be discredited. Wakefield published the results of the studies of 12 children in the now infamous study linking autism to MMR. He, of course, did not attack vaccination, only the MMR vaccine. At a press conference on his findings, he stated, quote, "My feeling is that the risk of autism developing is related to the combined vaccine, the MMR, rather than the single vaccines," unquote. Wakefield's study was published in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in Britain. Still, no one knew that his work had been funded by a lawyer suing the manufacturers of the MMR vaccine. Wakefield had told Barr that he only wanted him to attack the MMR vaccine and not the standalone measles vaccine. There was understandably a lot of media attention and press conference call. He told the assembled journalists that there is sufficient anxiety in my own mind for the long-term safety of the MMR vaccination in combination, I think it should be suspended in favour of the single vaccines, unquote. 2 weeks later, Wakefield revised his business plan, promoting his single measles vaccine and the diagnostic test to combat this new syndrome, which he dubbed autistic enterocolitis. A new syndrome was, a syndrome name was necessary because it turned out that none of the children had Crohn's disease. The business prospectus estimated that by year 3, income from this testing for this new syndrome could be about $4 million, rising to about $35 million. It also described a public relations effort aimed at 2 audiences, 2 target audiences, parent groups and lawyers representing affected individuals. But for all the preparations and the presentations to investors, one critical issue was not broached. The company's ambitious products might not work. After all, this was a plan to sell a cure for a disease that had been named by the same doctor diagnosing the disease. What if Wakefield couldn't back up his plan with results? The unraveling began upon the arrival of a new head of medicine in the hospital school of medicine called Mark Pepys. He was skeptical of Wakefield's claims. Wakefield had promoted the business side so much that no one had looked at the science underpinning his claims. In 1999, Pepys summoned Wakefield to the hospital's central London headquarters. Wakefield was challenged over the scheme, then on the verge of fruition, and was given a 2-page letter by the hospital. Quote, "We remain concerned about a possible serious conflict of interest between your academic employment at the hospital and your business operations. This concern arose originally because the company's business plan appears to depend on premature, scientifically unjustified publication of results which do not conform to the rigorous academic and scientific standards that are generally expected." Unquote. In other words, no one had ever verified the results of Wakefield's studies, and this was concerning. When Wakefield could not provide the evidence for his diagnostic theory, he said, quote, "I have been asked to go because my research results are unpopular," unquote. He would later allege sinister conspiracies to stop him revealing what he claimed were vaccination secrets. But Wakefield wasn't asked to go. He was asked to confirm or refute robustly, reliably, and above all reproducibly, the possible causal relationship between MMR vaccine and autism or autistic enterocolitis, which he had postulated. At the time, Wakefield agreed, and the hospital waited. It prompted, waited longer, prompted again. 3 months had passed. The hospital wrote to him in March 9, 2000 for a progress report on the study proposed, and not to make any public statements in the meantime. But the study did not happen. The Lancet research had been a sham. Trying to replicate it with greater numbers would have been hopeless. The General Medical Council, who is responsible for the licensing of doctors in the UK and supervising medical ethics, investigated the affair. Wakefield was found to have acted dishonestly and irresponsibly, and to have acted with callous disregard for the children involved in his study, conducting unnecessary and invasive tests. In April 2010, the British Medical Journal investigated the laboratory aspects of his findings, recounting how normal clinical results in the hospital were later changed in the medical school to abnormal results published in the Lancet. Wakefield had fabricated abnormal results. He had made them up. This essentially was a fatal blow, and it cast doubt on autistic enterocolitis that Wakefield claimed to have discovered. Wakefield was found guilty of serious misconduct on 4 counts of dishonesty, 12 involving the abuse of developmentally challenged children, and ordered that he be struck off the medical register, meaning he could no longer practice medicine in the UK. The Lancet fully retracted Wakefield's paper. Its editor-in-chief described it as utterly false and said the journal had been deceived. The British Medical Journal described the original paper as fraudulent. The scientific consensus of the MMR vaccine was that it had no link to the development of autism and that this vaccine's benefits greatly outweighed its risks. He went on to describe Wakefield's paper as perhaps the most damaging medical hoax of the last 100 years. Physicians, medical journals, and editors have described Wakefield's actions as fraudulent and tied them to epidemic and deaths. Well, with his theories debunked and his medical license revoked, what was Wakefield to do next? He set his sights on a land where alternate truths exist and conspiracy theories dominate the public opinion. Ready to go? He went to the USA, Texas to be precise, where he found a warm welcome with anti-vaccination groups. Of course, he conveniently dropped his patent for his vaccine and now makes a living promoting his discredited theories in the US, something he partly credits to the rise of social media. Facebook groups have joined the conspiratorial anti-vaccination groups, which researchers believe could keep the movement durable on a global scale. Wakefield declared, quote, "In the USA, it's become so polarized now, no one knows quite what to believe, so people are turning increasingly to social media," unquote. Ain't that the truth? In the summer of 2016, Wakefield met with Donald Trump. Trump confirmed that the MMR vaccine was harmful because he had personal knowledge. He did not elaborate further. Wakefield attended one of his inauguration balls after Trump won the presidential election. Wakefield published a video from one of the balls calling for the overhaul of the Centers for Disease Control. In the video, a tuxedo-clad Wakefield strolls through the ball declaring a very exciting time and briefly narrates his efforts to find influential people to talk about his proposals. Quote, "Just looking around to see if there's anyone important here. See if I can prevail upon them to make the world a better place for children with autism, a safer place for children. What we need now is a huge shake-up at the Center of Disease Control. A huge shake-up. We need to change dramatically," unquote. Wakefield also founded the Austin Media Channel in Austin, which makes videos asserting a link between autism and the MMR vaccine. His most famous film, Vaxxed, directed by Wakefield, was put forward at the 2016 Tribeca Film Festival by Robert De Niro, who has an autistic son. It alleges a cover-up of the alleged link between MMR and autism by the CDC. After the furore broke out in discussions with scientists, De Niro eventually withdrew the film. The scientific establishment has its work cut out. Wakefield and his supporters insist mainstream science is wrong and they will not be persuaded otherwise. The conspiracy theories of the anti-vaccine movement are all over the internet. The apparent acceptance of Wakefield into upper echelons of American society can only boost them further. An article appeared online on February 9th of this year which began with a seemingly innocuous question about the legal definition of vaccines. Then over its next 3,500 words, it declared coronavirus vaccines were a medical fraud and said that injections did not prevent infections, provide immunity, or stop transmission of the disease. Instead, the article claimed the shots alter your genetic coding, turning you into a viral protein factory that has no off switch. Its assertions were easily disprovable. No matter. Over the next few hours, the article was translated from English into Spanish, into Polish. It appeared on dozens of blogs and was picked up by the anti-vaccination activists, who repeated the false claims online. The article made its way to Facebook, where it reached 400,000 people. The entire effort was traced back to one person, Joseph McCullough. Dr. McCullough is an American osteopathic physician who has long been the subject of criticism and government regulatory actions for his promotion of unproven or unapproved treatments. But most recently has become the chief spreader of coronavirus misinformation online, according to researchers. An internet-savvy entrepreneur who employs dozens, Dr. McCullough has published over 600 articles on Facebook that cast doubt on the COVID-19 vaccine since the pandemic began, reaching a far larger audience than any other vaccine skeptic. His claims have been widely repeated on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. McCullough is a pioneer of the modern anti-vaccine movement, said Kalina Koltai, a researcher at the University of Washington who studies online conspiracy theories. Quote, he is a master of capitalizing on periods of uncertainty, like the pandemic, to grow his movement. Over the decade, Dr. McCullough has built a vast operation to push natural health cures, disseminate anti-vaccination content, and profit from it all. In 2017, he filed an affidavit which claimed his net worth was in excess of $100 million. And rather than directly stating online that vaccines don't work, Dr. McCullough's technique is to post pointed questions about their safety and discuss studies that other doctors have refuted. His audience is substantial. Dr. McCullough's official English language Facebook page has over 1.7 million followers, while his Spanish language page has 1 million more. 17 other Facebook pages are run by him or are closely connected with his business. On Twitter, he has 300,000 followers and about 400,000 on YouTube. When the coronavirus hit last year, Dr. McCullough jumped on the news with posts questioning the origins of the disease. In December, he used a study that examined mask wearing by doctors to argue that masks did not stop the spread of the virus. He also began promoting vitamin supplements as a way to ward off the coronavirus. And in a warning letter on February 18th of this year, the FDA said Dr. McCullough had misleadingly represented what were unapproved and misbranded products on McCullough.com and as established COVID-19 treatments. Now, Republican House members in Ohio had invited Sherry Tenpenny to testify in support of a bill that would weaken Ohio's state vaccination laws. Now, Sherry Tenpenny is a licensed doctor who's carving quite a name for herself, quite a career, denying science and spreading lies about COVID-19. I'm sure you've seen the pictures all over the internet of people who have had these shots, and now they're magnetized, she said, out loud. You can put a key on your forehead, it sticks. You can put spoons and forks all over, and they can stick, because now we think there is a metal piece to the vaccine. I brought these along just to see whether, and I've been vaccinated. So it sounds a little crazy, right? Well, I mean, who will believe that? Huh? Shortly after, the CDC felt compelled to release a statement assuring everyone that the COVID vaccine will not make you magnetic, including at the site of the vaccination. He went on to explain that all COVID-19 vaccines are free of metal. Tenpenny and her kind will continue to mislead, often at the invitation of public officials who were elected to serve and protect. They're fueling suspicions and imperiling lives. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of doses of COVID vaccine will soon expire if not used. And this is happening even as experts, the real ones, warn of new COVID surges to come. I have received emails from friends warning me of the dangers of being vaccinated. One friend who refuses to come close to me because I have been vaccinated. Of course, he remains unvaccinated, so it's fine with me. Friends send me emails with information from Dr. McCullough and his followers. And yes, I still consider them to be my friends, who are being sincere in their efforts to warn me. They are not making money from the information they propagate. And it's difficult for them to discern fact from devious fiction when our trust in institutions is low, and sometimes deservedly so. Politics and greed have inserted themselves into science. Our faith in the message is tainted. Friends, but the cost of being wrong can be fatal. And not just to you, but to others. Friends, family, and strangers alike. So for those of you who have doubts, have questions, if you should get sick with COVID-19, which of those anti-vaxxers will take care of you and assume your responsibilities? If you end up to a ventilator, which of them is going to save your life? Doctors McCullough and Tenpenny? Or Dr. Smith and Nurse Jones, who have been pulling double shifts with little time off for the last 18 months? Trust me, they're not the ones telling you not to get the vaccine, and they're not getting rich by telling you to get vaccinated. Hey, Big Pharma? Yeah, so do most people. Ranking them below lawyers on a scale of trustworthiness. Can you imagine? The ability to profit from other people's misery seems to be the epitome of heartless capitalism. And while they collectively might hold us to ransom, don't let this sway you in the effectiveness of the vaccine. These are two separate things. The vaccine exists. Big Pharma made it. Billions of doses in record time. Hate them and still get the vaccine. It's easy to be blinded by all the arguments against the vaccine. But really the only thing that matters is, does it work and are they safe? Given that the ICU beds in hospitals right now are full of COVID patients almost exclusively unvaccinated, the logic of spiting Big Pharma, or science, or liberals, or suspecting Verizon 5G, or Bill Gates' chip, or poor old human punchbag Dr. Fauci, that's the logic of self-harm. Continue with all your dislikes and disdain, but do yourself a favor. Get the vaccine. At the end of the day, we have to realize that life is risky, and nothing is risk-free. If that concerns anyone about getting the vaccine, remember that the choice not to get a vaccine is not a choice to take no risk. It's just a choice to take a different risk. A much graver risk. Be well. Thank you.